Namaskar, welcome. This is Dada Rainjitananda. Welcome to this second class of our Ananda Marga Elementary Philosophy course. First, I will answer with more detail one question from last time. The question was about the layers of the mind. So how do the layers of the mind relate to the three parts of the mind, Mahatattva, Ahamtattva, and Chitta? The layers of the mind are in the Chitta, actually. And there are 5 layers. The subtlest one is the Hiramaya Kosha. And that is the subtlest portion of the Chitta. And the crudest portion of the Chitta is the Kamamaya Kosha. So the Chitta, in the process of crudification, is transforming itself in all these koshas, from the subtlest to the crudest. The 5 koshas are the Kamamaya, Manomaya, Atimanas, Vijnanamaya, and Hiranamaya kosha. The English names for them, the conscious, subconscious, supramental, subliminal, and the Hiranmaya kosha is called the golden layer or the causal. And these layers, when are they created? They are created after all the 5 fundamental factors are created. If there is congenial conditions, life gets created. And life in the beginning is very primitive. So the mind is very primitive. So in the beginning, is only created, body is created and primitive mind. And that's Kamamaya Kosha. As the mind becomes more developed, then the other koshas started being created. So that is the process of returning from crude to subtle, means the prati sanchara in the cycle of creation. So the mind goes on developing, so all these layers go on being created. So today's presentation is on what is the cosmic entity. That's the second chapter of the elementary philosophy book. Start with a statement from Sri Anandamurti. When we finished the last time, we had established that Brahma exists. Brahma exists. And also, it is Paramatman, that's one name. Bhuma Chaitanya, another name. In English, universal consciousness or consciousness in its totality. The way this book is made is that everything is explained in a logical progression. If you remember last class, we started from the action being done in the external world, and we may think that this action is done by my body. Then, no, it's not done by the body, it's done by the mind. So we are going in a process of going more internally. The mind only exists because there is a unit consciousness. There is an I that witnesses it. Otherwise, it wouldn't even exist. And that totality of all the unit consciousness makes the cosmic consciousness. So we came to the conclusion that Brahma exists. And today, let's see how this Brahma is. We already mentioned Prakriti, and Prakriti is the principle of Purusha. What does Prakriti do? It transforms Purusha, it qualifies Purusha. What is Purusha? Purusha is consciousness, pure consciousness. And what is Prakriti? A principle of Purusha. So Prakriti, what does it do? It qualifies Purusha. And they are inseparable. Where there is Purusha, there is Prakriti. Even though they are two distinct entities, still they are inseparable. Consciousness is like the raw material that the whole universe is made of. Prakriti is changing this consciousness and making it into all the different shapes and forms and colors that we see. So that is the work of Prakriti, modifying this Purusha. Just imagine something like if Purusha is the clay and Prakriti is the one that gives different forms to the clay, like makes it a plate or a cup. The only thing here is that there is not an external entity doing it. It's like a self-modeling clay. It's taking the shape. It seems it's taking the shape by itself, but there is something in it that makes it take the shape, and that is the Prakriti. So Prakriti is modifying Purusha, and Purusha is taking the different shapes. Coming back to Brahma, we have Purusha, consciousness, we have Prakriti that qualifies Purusha. These two together make Brahma. So Purusha plus Prakriti equals Brahma. Consciousness plus its qualifying principle equal that cosmic entity. Purusha is subtle, means we cannot see consciousness when it's in the consciousness state. We only see it when it's changed by Prakriti. But Prakriti is also subtle. We cannot see Prakriti. It is the qualifying principle and we cannot see it. Just to make a comparison with fire. Fire has the capacity to burn. That capacity of burning exists wherever fire is. We cannot separate them. At the same time, we cannot see it, even though fire is something crude, but we cannot see this quality of burning from the fire. What about consciousness? What is the cause of consciousness? We know that, let's say, the cause of chitta is aham. When aham gets influenced by the tamasic force or the tamaguna of Prakriti, then that aham becomes chitta. So what's the cause of aham? The cause of aham is mahat. When mahat gets influenced by the Rajaguna force or the Rajaguna of Prakriti, the Mahat becomes Aham. And what is the cause of Aham? Unit consciousness, Atman. When the Atman gets influenced by the Sattva Guna, then Atman becomes Mahat. But what's the cause of unit consciousness? What creates unit consciousness? Unit consciousness is non-causal. It is always there. So this Purusha is non-causal. Prakriti, what creates the Prakriti? Does Purusha create Prakriti? Actually, without Prakriti, Purusha just remains in that state of formless, infinite, no change. So Purusha cannot create Prakriti. So Prakriti also is non-causal. It is always there. Where there is Purusha, there is Prakriti. And Brahma is the composite of Purusha and Prakriti. So Brahma is also non-causal. There is no beginning. So Brahma is non-causal, Purusha is non-causal, Prakriti is non-causal. But if we take mind, the cause of mind is consciousness. If we take the physical factors, the cause of the physical factors is mind. Okay, so Brahma, we want to understand it. We want to understand it. And if we see, for example, how can we understand something? If we to understand something, we have to look at it in a way that we can measure it. So here, can we measure Brahma? You know, in science, we have been inventing new devices, more powerful microscopes, telescopes, and many other instruments we have been inventing so that we can measure everything, we can see everything, we can understand everything. Can we understand Brahma with all these instruments? If we develop more and more expanded, capable instruments, can we measure Brahma? If we are going to make an instrument using matter, using the 5 fundamental factors, that instrument cannot be subtle. It has to be crude. So now, how can a crude instrument come in contact with a subtle thing like consciousness? It will have to transform itself from crude to subtle. And no material factor, let's say, even ether is very subtle, but it still has a tanmatra. We explained tanmatra last time. So the tanmatra that works in ether is the sound tanmatra. Wherever there is tanmatra, there is a crude factor. It is when there is no tanmatra, then it's subtle. So ether, very subtle, but we cannot even see it, but still it transports sound. So it has a tanmatra, so it's also in the crude level. Then aerial factor, it transports touch and sound. And luminous factor, form, touch, and sound. And the liquid factor, taste, form, touch, and sound. And the solid factor, smell, taste, form, touch, sound. All the tanmatras. So no instrument that we can create with these crude factors can measure the subtle consciousness. So never it will happen that science will be so developed that it can measure with its instruments the subtleness of consciousness. So then we can use the mind. The mind is subtle. The mind can think of abstract things. Mind does not contain any tanmatra. We can grasp an idea, we can think, we can feel. So can we use the mind to measure the consciousness? What part of the mind works? The part of the mind that works is the aham. Okay, aham is like, I want to know consciousness. That is coming from aham. Now aham is telling the chitta to get the form of consciousness. But you see, aham, chitta is cruder than aham, and consciousness is subtler than aham. Now, can aham measure consciousness? In between aham and consciousness, there is mahat. So, to measure consciousness, aham will have to transform itself into mahat. So, mahat can come in contact with consciousness. But what happens is that capacity to act lies on aham. So aham is the one that acts. The moment it transforms into mahat, it's I am. And that I am does not act. So it is not going to measure the consciousness. Therefore, our mind also fails to be a good instrument to measure consciousness. Brahma, having these two parts, Prakriti and Purusha, consciousness and the qualifying principle. If the qualifying principle is not qualifying the consciousness remains in its infinite, shapeless form, and that we call Nirguna Brahma. So in the state of Nirguna Brahma, in that state, Brahma cannot be qualified by consciousness. There is another state where Brahma is modified by Prakriti. In that state, it is called Saguna Brahma. The example that was given is like an iceberg in the water. At a certain position, at a certain point, the cold has been able to freeze the water, and that part of the water becomes an iceberg. In the rest of the water, the cold has not been able to freeze it, so it remains water. Coming to the point of Brahma, in a certain point, Prakriti has been able to qualify Purusha, and that creates Saguna. In another, Prakriti has not been able to qualify Nirguna, so it remains Nirguna. Then the question comes, why Prakriti could not qualify Purusha? There are two possibilities. One is that Prakriti in one place is stronger and Prakriti in another place is weaker. The second choice is Purusha in a certain situation is stronger and in another is weaker. As per the philosophy, Prakriti has the same intensity everywhere. So everywhere, Prakriti is making its effort to qualify Purusha with the same intensity and everywhere. But what happens is that in certain places, situations, Purusha is denser. Purusha being denser, Prakriti cannot influence it so much. Prakriti is always trying to crudify, is always taking Purusha and qualifying Purusha, makes it into mind, qualifies the mind, make it into the five fundamental factors, and then continues exerting its pressure and having the five fundamental factors, Prakriti exerting its pressure, then two things can happen. One is so much pressure on the solid factor, everything explodes and goes back to original factors. Or life is created through that pressure. A nucleus is formed in that structure and life is created. So Prakriti is always doing its work to qualify Purusha, and more pressure, more pressure, more pressure. Means starts with the Sattva Guna, then comes the Raja Guna, then comes the Tamaguna, is the maximum crudification. So that is, Prakriti is doing that all the time. Now, in certain situations, Purusha being denser doesn't get influenced by Prakriti. In others, it gets influenced by Prakriti. Now imagine in our human life as human beings, if we are very spiritually elevated and spiritually charged, it's difficult that Prakriti creates problems for us. But if we are less inspired, then it's easier for Prakriti to create situations in our mind. So if our mind is very much connected with consciousness, Prakriti will have little effect and will maintain that tranquility of mind. That's why we need to do meditation regularly so that we come in contact with consciousness regularly and the mind doesn't get let's say, crudified by Prakriti. So the more we can keep our ideation on consciousness, the less Prakriti can influence our mind. So that's about Nirguna Brahma, Saguna Brahma. Everything is Brahma, is the same Brahma, but Nirguna is not qualified, Saguna is qualified. Now from Saguna, the qualified Brahma, that is where cosmic mind comes into existence. From Saguna Brahma, qualified by Prakriti, comes into existence the cosmic mind. So cosmic mind is within Saguna. And within the cosmic mind are the fundamental factors. Within the cosmic mind is the creation. The creation is a thought projection of the cosmic mind. So this everything that is qualified is within the Saguna. Nirguna is that perfect, non-qualified Brahma. Now last time we talked about Bhagavan. We talked that Bhagavan exists, so the supreme entity exists. Now, the question here is that supreme entity that we came to the conclusion it exists last time, is that Saguna or Nirguna? The meaning of Bhagavan is the one who has Bhaga, and Bhaga is absolute power. If it has an attribute, that attribute of having absolute power, then it is not the non-qualified, it's the qualified. So Bhagavan is actually in Saguna Brahma. So now we as human beings, what is our goal? Now we are meditating. We want to reach to the supreme entity. Now, do we want to reach the state of Bhagavan? What is the state we want to reach? Do we want to reach the qualified state or the non-qualified state? So in the philosophy, the supreme state is the state of Nirguna Brahma, the state where Brahma is not qualified by Prakriti, and that is beyond Bhagavan. So that is the supreme state. Okay, we are coming to the end of this presentation, and I'm going to give a summary so you can already think of your questions. And even if you know how to use this software and you know how to raise your hands and you have a microphone and a headset so that we don't get the feedback from the speakers, then you may raise your hands and we can also have some interaction by voice. Okay, so I go here now to the summary. What did we talk today? We talked a little bit about Prakriti. We talked a little bit about Purusha. Purusha is consciousness. Prakriti is the qualifying principle of Purusha. So the whole universe as we see it, everything is consciousness. Consciousness then gets qualified, and that is the state of Saguna Brahma, when Brahma is qualified by the three gunas of Prakriti. So the gunas of Prakriti are working, qualifying Brahma. If Brahma is the collection of all the unit consciousness, now Prakriti is working, qualifying this unit consciousness, like suppose there is this ocean of consciousness. Now Prakriti is getting one of the drops and qualifying it. So it's creating a being. Let's say it creates a human being. All right. Now this human being, how is the human being? There is consciousness. Now this consciousness gets modified, and mind, there are different levels of the mind, and there is body. But human beings are created when the crude is becoming subtle. It means in the returning phase of the creation. Okay, in the returning phase of the creation, individual bodies holding minds are created, and those minds go on becoming more subtle up to the point that it becomes a human mind. Now, human mind is capable of self-reflection. It's evolved being. Now it is capable of thinking or making an effort to think about consciousness. So when the aham in the mind makes the effort to think about consciousness, then it transforms into mahat, and mahat transforms into consciousness. So in, in this process of transformation from physical to mental, mental to spiritual, is done within the human bio psychic spiritual structure. So this human machine, what is it supposed to do? It is supposed to transform crude into subtle, physical into mental, mental into spiritual. Okay, today we also talked that what is Brahma? Purusha plus Prakriti, that makes Brahma. So Brahma is composed of Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti and Purusha are everywhere. Sometimes Prakriti is qualifying Purusha, that's Saguna Brahma. If Prakriti is not qualifying Purusha, that's Nirguna Brahma. Prakriti always has the same intensity. So the variation is Brahma. So Brahma is the one that is deciding that Prakriti can influence it or Prakriti cannot influence it. The decision is not in Prakriti. Prakriti is always trying, always trying. Then we talked about Bhagavan. And is that the state we want to reach? No. Bhagavan has attributes. It is in the Saguna Brahma, is in the modified Brahma. We want to go to the supreme state, to the infinite Brahma, to the formless Brahma, and that's the Nirguna. So the proper meditation or the proper sadhana, the goal is Nirguna, is the unqualified state. That's the highest goal. By knowing more the philosophy, we can also analyze the practices. What practice one individual is doing, what practice we are learning, how far that practice can take us, what is the goal of that practice. Then we can compare different practices. Should I do this type of meditation or that type of meditation? This type of meditation, is it going to take my aham in which direction? Up to Mahat, or up to unit consciousness, or up to cosmic consciousness, up to Saguna Brahma, or up to Nirguna Brahma? Okay, this much for the presentation today, for the theoretical part. Now, I can ask you a few questions just to make you think a little bit. So the first question is, okay, you have to choose which one is wrong. Right, great. Everybody voted. Let me show you the results. 50% think is the first one. Nobody thinks that, okay, everybody thinks Purusha and Prakriti are inseparable. That everybody agrees. Purusha is subtle. Everybody agrees. Prakriti is the qualifying principle of Purusha, the third one. That's correct. And the 5 layers of the mind are within the chitta, Yeah, that I explained in the beginning. The 5 layers of the mind are within the chitta. The one that is the statement that is wrong here is that the last one, Prakriti, is crude. No, Prakriti is also subtle. Purusha is subtle, Prakriti also subtle. But what happens is that when Prakriti influences Purusha or qualifies it, then it makes it into something crude. But Purusha itself is subtle, and Prakriti itself is subtle. All right, great. Okay, one more question is there. Purusha is non-causal and Prakriti is non-causal. That is correct one. Mind cannot measure Brahma. Yeah, mind cannot measure Brahma. That's also correct. Nor can any instrument. Number 2 is also correct. Prakriti qualifies Purusha in Saguna Brahma. Yes, that's correct. Bhagavan is the supreme state. No, this is the wrong one. And the last one, Prakriti cannot qualify Purusha in Nirguna Brahma. That's correct. So the wrong one is that Bhagavan is the supreme state. No, Bhagavan is still the state of Saguna, is still qualified. So we want to go beyond that. I have another question. Let me put the question to you. So does the concept of Brahma, as we presented today, does it match your concept of God? 38% say yes, 25% say no, 38% not sure. So it's kind of balanced there. So far in this course, we had, in the first class, all the discussion was to say that human beings want something infinite, okay, that we are not satisfied with the limited. So that was one of the points. Then, so what is infinite? No material thing is infinite. So we came to the idea Brahma is infinite. So that was our discussion in the first class. Then, okay, Brahma is infinite. Then the question was, does Brahma exist? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. We want the infinite, and the infinite is Brahma, and it doesn't exist. So does Brahma exist? So we went into an exercise, a logical exercise, to come to the point that, yes, Brahma exists. So first we had to start from the physical, that we are sure that the body exists and the body is acting. But then is really acting the body or is the mind? Then we came to the mind. Then we try to understand the mind, how the mind works. And to make the mind work, to understand the functioning of the mind, we divided it into 3 parts. Okay, so those 3 parts helped us to understand how the mind works. One part takes the form of the object. Another part looks at the object, sees it, but it needs the eye to do to be there needs an existence of an eye to be able to want to see, and that eye was the Mahat. And if that eye exists in the mind, and what is witnessing the mind is the eye. The eye is witnessing the whole mind. So that eye is the unit consciousness, and all unit consciousness together, cosmic consciousness. So we come to the point that yes, cosmic consciousness exists. Now, what is this cosmic consciousness? I remember once I was in Greenland, and I was staying in a place, was like an apartment building that they rent rooms to workers. People come to Greenland to work for the summer. They stay in those rooms. So I was staying in one of those rooms. And one day, one person knocked the door. So I opened the door, and it was a young man. And he asked me, "Would you like to talk about God?" I said, "Sure, why not? Come in." And he came in, sat down, and we were talking. And at a certain point, he was telling me that God is everywhere and God is in everything. Then we were sitting around a table. Then I asked him, "Is God in this table?" He was in doubt. He thought, and he said, "You mean in the table?" I said, "Yes, I mean in the table." He thought a little bit, and then he wasn't not sure. So he told me, "I have to ask my supervisor, and next time I can tell you." Okay. Now, if in our explanation today that everything is consciousness and it's just Purusha is being modified by Prakriti, and that is creating all these fundamental factors, and all the fundamental factors are creating all the objects that we know. So, in the end, everything is consciousness. So, nothing is inert matter. Even the computer we are using is in front of us. That is also an expression of consciousness. It's just consciousness modified by Prakriti. I have a last question, and it's very much related to the previous one. So, did you change your concept of God by today's class? 29% said yes, 71% no. Okay, so I mean, it's interesting. Maybe some of you already know the philosophy for a long time, some are new to it. But always, if we study by knowing more, our concept of things change, our understanding of things change. And not only studying, by progressing, let's say spiritually, it means we are moving towards consciousness. By moving in that direction, we start to understand a little bit better differently. So our concept will change. So now I'm ready for your questions.
One is, if by reaching the supreme consciousness you become one with nirguna, you don't have bliss, why should I try to achieve that state?
Oh, I see. No, the process of coming closer and merging to nirguna is infinite bliss. It, the feeling of consciousness is the feeling of infinite bliss. So by reaching nirguna, we merge into infinite bliss. There are different states of, let's say, absorption, of samadhi. When one goes into the state of nirguna samadhi, which is the nirvikalpa samadhi, okay, merges into nirguna, if it's not of permanent nature, means we still have some work to do, so we have to come back. So now we went into that state and we came out from that state. We will be experimenting overwhelming bliss. So nirguna is full bliss, means infinite bliss. So that's the so and the movement towards it is the movement of ever increasing bliss. So the more the as I mentioned before, the feeling of consciousness is the feeling of bliss. Now, how do we experience some moments of bliss in our life? Suppose we are meditating. Our mind is becoming so subtle by our thought waves are becoming so subtle that at a certain point, from mental wave, it becomes a spiritual wave. That moment, we enter in a state of bliss. But then again, the mind goes out from that state. Then we come again to mental level. But that moment, we experience bliss. So it is a blissful state. That's why we want it. Because we are not satisfied with any limited bliss. We want infinite bliss. All right. Thank you very much for participating. Good night. Namaskar.